Garrett, a Yorktown Christmas time travel novella by Izzy James. Text, copyright 2020 by Elizabeth C. Hull. Audio copyright 2025 by Elizabeth C. Hull. Dedication. For my treasures in earthen vessels, Ashley, Caleb, and Magdalene. Chapter 1. Max shimmered by him as Garrett stepped down from the back steps into what should have been the backyard. His foot landed on a polished wooden floor instead of the grass he'd helped plant at the Ballard house. A room took shape around him. The chamber was, as Olivia's grandmother had described, windows on 3 sides, a piano decked one wall. It must be Max's conservatory. Max must have come back through time once again to meet Olivia. Garrett spun to follow Max to see the look on Olivia's face. It was only, an hour ago she'd told him she'd despaired of ever seeing Max again? One look into the adjoining room stopped him cold. It was all wrong. The room was full. Furniture, papers, books, stuff. All the historic houses he knew were basically empty except for a few well-chosen period pieces. He grabbed his head to ground the floating. An Elizabethan voice sounded from somewhere beyond the door. Garrett dodged back into the conservatory. A lurch in his stomach told Garrett his organs were all in place. He flattened palms against his middle and decided then and there that beaming around the universe was definitely not for him. Garrett dropped to get as far below the wall of windows facing him as he could. He slipped into a corner next to a table with long legs to gather his thoughts. He ducked under the table as a man dressed in breeches and a large white shirt stepped into the room. "He's not here," the man called back, spun on his heel, and left. Garrett slid moist palms down his cotton pants and tried to calm his breathing. At least he'd arrived at whatever time this was in his docent costume. He pulled out his phone. No bars, full battery. He rolled his eyes. Of course there were no bars. He didn't know what year it was, but by the looks and sound of things, it had to be the 17-somethings. Fear clenched his stomach. What would they do if they found him with a phone? With shaking hands, he turned the device off and clutched it to his chest. There was no telling what kind of trouble he'd get into if he was found with a ringing phone. Did they still burn people at the stake? Maybe he should bury it. Wait. No one could call him here. At least he didn't think so. No telling what the crazy inventors of the 1700s could have managed without realizing it. He grinned at the electrical experiments he'd read about. Muffled voices sounded from the front of the house. This time his breathing had slowed enough to register footsteps. He had to get out of here. Garrett eased from under the table and stood. 3 steps to the door and he'd be free. The door creaked. Garrett reached the side of the house just in time to hear the man call for Max again. He stilled. Thank God for the cover of night. Moist air hugged his clothes to his skin. Awfully warm for December. He needed to find out where in time he was. If his history was right, he wouldn't be able to tell from a newspaper. A cacophony of smells overwhelmed him. Horses, mud, salty river, wood-burning fires, food. Sounds filtered into his consciousness. Laughter, clinking of metal and glass. The Swan Tavern would be open. In all his time at working at Yorktown, he'd never seen anyone but tourists in the Swan. Of course, it was just a replica anyway. The original tavern blew up during the Civil War. Too bad it couldn't take a picture. Now that would be something, if he could get back home. The sun hadn't been gone long, judging by the placement of the moon. Curiosity pulled him to the York River. He crossed Main Street. What Olivia would give to see this. What he would have given to share it with her. The sleepy historic town with its empty lots was gone. Every lot was full of houses and their dependencies. Yorktown was downright crowded. Smells of horse and salty river tinged his nostrils. Laughter from another tavern ablaze in the dark reached him. The grass-lined path of the great valley, still present in his time, was more defined now, still overshadowed by William Nelson's house. Candlelight glowed in one downstairs room. Mr. Nelson at his books? He passed Nelson's store and continued down the sloped path. Warehouses lined the waterfront. Ships creaked at the docks. Warehouses replaced the boardwalk he knew. The bridge to Gloucester had yet to be built. 3 drunken sailors weaved into him, nearly knocked him to the unpaved street. "Watch where you're going," the tall one slurred. A distant history of press gangs flashed into Garrett's mind. He needed to find shelter until he could make out where and when he was. He'd no desire to be conscripted. He ducked into the first street that offered itself, moving quickly down past a third tavern bright with light and ruckus. A scuffle just beyond lifted the little hairs at the back of his neck. A man straightened from leaning face into a wall. He bumped past Garrett before Garrett knew what happened. In the shadow of the building, a woman took shape, silently sliding down the wall to sit on the ground. Garrett had never seen such a thing. He'd heard about it, of course, but the coldness of the encounter startled him. If this was her trade, why did she sit motionless on the ground? He took a tentative step toward her. She pulled her legs up and wrapped her arms around them. Something was wrong. "Miss?" She twisted from him. He took another step closer. "Don't you touch me!" Understanding brought a red-hot rage surging through him. He scanned the surrounding area. Gone. Garrett restrained his fisted hands behind his back. How had he not understood right away what was happening? "I won't harm you." She retrieved something from the ground before she used one arm against the wall to push herself up. "Get away from me." The knife she waved at him was short, but the point glinted sharp in the scanty light. He held his hands up. "Let me see you safely home." "No." "Let's call the police." She stared at him. His shoulders slumped. "Right, there's no police yet." "I mean you no harm." "Get away from me." "As you wish." He retreated, his hands palms toward her in plain sight. She edged away from him, keeping him in her sights, knife at the ready. After a half a block, she turned and scurried down the street. Garrett took quiet steps to see her home safely. After 2 blocks, she hurried up to the door of a small white clapboard house not 5 steps from the street. Hand on the doorknob, she spun around once again. "I told you to stay away from me." Her voice trembled. Garrett remained in the street. "Not until I knew you were home safely." She nodded before stepping into the house. She closed the door behind her. A lock clicked into place. A small round of candlelight hovered in the front window before slowly making its way to the second floor. Behind the house stood the dependencies missing from the house in the 21st century. A kitchen, smokehouse, dairy, laundry, and a couple he couldn't see clearly. The only real complete set he'd ever seen was at George Washington's Mount Vernon. He couldn't wait to see them by light of day. A horse snuffled in its shed. Garrett tiptoed to the back of the kitchen and leaned against the sturdy wall. Suddenly weary, he slid down to rest. Legs stretched out in front of him, crossed at the ankles, Garrett stared at the stars. They sparkled brighter, probably due to the lack of street lamps. Not that he expected anything different. Not that he ever expected to be 250 years in the past. This Christmas he'd planned to finally have it out with his parents, find equal ground. He'd chosen his path. They needed to respect that. Perhaps he didn't have a big enough soul, but he couldn't imagine being a funeral director. Someone has to do it, he knew that, but it wasn't him. Even when he had to help in high school, he stayed away from the embalming room. Tomorrow would have been the day. Did they even know he was gone? That's one thing to say for time travel. It sure got him out of a sticky mess, and landed him an even stickier one. He didn't know why God brought him all the way here, but one thing was certain. No one would hurt that woman again, not as long as he remained in whatever time this was, and he had nowhere else to go. Mercy leaned against the locked front door, clutching her knife to her chest. Tremors began deep in her belly. Darkness through black windows creeped into the room. She dropped her head into her hands. Her stomach rebelled at the rancid smell of the man perfuming her fingers. The tenderness in her body would be soothed by immersion in a hot bath with bayberry soap. Once again she took in the seeping shadows of the windows. There was no way she'd go out of this house again tonight. The basin would have to suffice. She struck a light to the candle on the nearby table and ran up the stairs to her room. It was as she'd left it. Canopy curtains, as plain and clean as she had always been, still hung where she left them. The hearth still swept and cold. Her chair and sewing basket waited. A banked fire would be nice tonight despite the warmth of September, yet her sanctuary offered no comfort. She longed to roll into a ball and hide in her bed, but she couldn't abide the stench. Only one of the marks the man who'd ruined her life. Once Mercy'd shed her clothes into a pile near the door, she cleaned herself in the basin and donned a fresh muslin shift. She kicked the soiled clothes onto the landing and closed her door. There would be time enough to clean them tomorrow. She placed the candle on the bedside table. The flame stood steady in the closed room. She left it to burn. Under the coverlet in her bed, images of the man and what he did to her played in a loop. Perhaps if she'd taken another route. If only Mr. Purdy hadn't needed the shirt for his daughter's wedding on the morrow, she wouldn't have been out after dark. If only she'd been able to hold on to her knife. The brute brushed aside her attempts to defend herself like he might a pesky fly. Her back ached from the bruises of repeated banging into the wall. Mercy rolled out of bed. Stepping over the pile of clothes outside her door, she made her way carefully down the stairs. This was her home, the place of her most sacred memories. Her mother baked their bread in this kitchen. Her father taught her to tailor a suit in this workroom. How she'd missed the sounds of laughter as they bantered back and forth throughout the day. Their love blessed this house. Mercy would not allow one man's evil to contaminate it. Fine lawn cloth lay ready for her scissors. Mr. Haynes had ordered 3 shirts due by the end of next week. She could cut them out. Put her hands to work until her head settled down. She lit another precious candle and set it above the workbench. She didn't usually cut material this late, but tonight was a night of many exceptions. She pinned the shirt pattern to the cloth. The care she placed on the exact placement of her scissor blade, the exactness of her buttonholes, hallmarks of her finely made shirts. The attention to detail she required of herself. It would get her through. Focus on the work, not on the brute. Thomas. She took a deep breath. Had anyone seen? What if there was a baby? She would have to leave. Mercy slumped into the well-worn work chair and let the gloom wash over her. She ran trembling fingers over the work table covered in nicks and bruises from years of her father's work and now her own. Thank God she had the house. It wouldn't do her much good if she couldn't live here, but she had it, and that was something. Oh, what she'd give to speak to her mother and father right now. Tears spilled over the rims of her eyes. Her dear mamma would know what to do. Her papa would go after the man. She shuddered. At least she wouldn't have to marry the foul-smelling stranger. No telling what would have happened if her father had caught the man. Of course, if her father was still alive, she'd have never had to go out and deliver a shirt at night anyway, and certainly not alone. She smiled at the memory of her father's voice. A Hansford shirt is made of sturdy stuff, just like the Hansfords. Sturdy stuff. Lord, give me strength. She took her place at the work table and began to cut.